Hey there, friends. You ever get that feeling we've been here before?
Then put your little hand in mine. There ain't no hill or mountain we can't climb.
Well, I'm getting that feeling now. Yesterday they held a press conference in Florida regarding the newest Trump assassination attempt. I don't know why people want to call it something else. We'll get more into that later. But you had the return of superstar director Ron Rowe, acting director, if you will, of the Secret Service. You also had the head of the FBI down there and the liberal sheriff of the area. He's an ass. I mean, you can tell a sheriff is an ass. But this was a very interesting press conference where we saw a lot of the same that we've seen before 60 days ago. Take a look at what Director Rowe had to say. Notice how many times he pats himself, the Secret Service, and Joe Biden on the back and doesn't really address in any kind of way the shortcomings. In fact, calls everything the Secret Service did a success. Remember, during the Butler thing, he said it was a debacle and a failure. He never says that, not one time. In fact, calls this textbook.
At approximately 1:30 p.m., former President Trump was playing golf during an off-the-record movement to the Trump International Golf Course. A Secret Service advance agent supporting the front edge of the agency's layered approach to protection encountered an individual attempting to secrete himself in the wood line. This happened, the alleged gunman was on the public side of the fence near the sixth green. A layered approach to security is integral to the Secret Service's protective methodologies, and it's also the key to our success. As former President Trump was moving through the fifth fairway across the course and out of sight of the sixth green, the agent, who was visually sweeping the area of the sixth green, saw the subject armed with what he perceived to be a rifle and immediately discharged his firearm. The subject, who did not have line of sight to the former president, fled the scene. He did not fire or get off any shots at our agent. With reports of gunfire, the former president's close protection detail immediately evacuated the president to a safe location. The protective methodologies of the Secret Service were effective yesterday. The former president's protective apparatus allowed for the early identification of the threat and led to a safe evacuation. The increased assets directed by President Biden were in place yesterday. These included the counter-sniper team elements, counter-surveillance agents on the exterior, counter-assault teams partnered with local tactical assets from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and counter-unmanned aerial system elements. All of these entities were present yesterday. And while all of these assets were in place, as I've said publicly, we must satisfy the basic requirements of the Secret Service's protective methodologies. In partnership with local law enforcement, we did just that. And the agents' hypervigilance and the detailed swift action was textbook. And I commend them and our partners for an exemplary response in keeping former President Trump safe.
Now, the first thing I got to point out, and this is kind of funny, you notice how when he first started, he said that this happened around 1:30 p.m.
At approximately 1:30 p.m.
Remember those at Super Troopers where they kept saying the meow? That's what this reminded me of.
Now, do you know how fast you were going? Now, what is so damn funny?
I could have sworn you said meow.
Do I look like a cat to you, boy?
That cracked me up. That was so weird. Meow. It just it took me right back to that scene, right?
1:30 p.m.
This guy, though, he's a trip, man. First of all, he tends to blame Trump in many ways by calling this an off-the-record movement. In fact, there were some questions that were taken later on where he multiple times, when was asked about this and the failures of them to secure the place, he mentions again, this was an off-the-record movement. So they're blaming Trump for deciding that he wanted to go golfing without having it on an official schedule. Well, if I'm Trump, I'm not really trusting the Secret Service to know what my long-term schedule is, because obviously they're being led by left-leaning Democrats. They've already failed in two separate occasions. The most opportune places for a potential shooter to be were actually occupied by those two people at two occurrences happening 60 days apart. So I certainly don't blame Trump for not letting them know days in advance when he intends to play golf. But you can't tell me that an overfunded organization like the Secret Service can't mobilize within an hour or two when Trump tells them, hey, I'm about to go play golf. So you're telling me they would have done something different if this would have been on the schedule? I'm asking a serious question here. The follow-up question by the reporter who asked that later on should have been, okay, cool, had this been on the schedule, had it been an on-the-record event, what would you have done different? I think you would have caught this guy stumbling on his words at that point. He mentions that the layered approach was the, quote, key to the success. They're calling this a success. They say the protective methodologies were effective yesterday. This, again, is continuously being seen as a success. Do you feel like this was a success? Do you feel like whenever the Secret Service is responsible for covering a particular area, if it's a success, would you still say that if the person got within shooting range of your protectee? If your protectee was 270 something yards away, which is about what this was, and you had a person with a firearm with an effective range of, the sheriff said it, he's a former Marine, right? Of 500 yards, you're calling this a success? If your perimeter was breached by somebody with a firearm, you never detected them until he had a firearm, according to them, trained in the direction of your protectee. And that's a success. He mentioned that the increased assets directed by Joe Biden were in place. What were those assets? And we'll get more into what he claims was there here in just a second. But if Biden is explaining to them or directing them to use additional assets, I'd like to know what those were. Was it additional people? Was it maybe a new app on your phone where you could actually call for help whenever you found somebody on your golf course with an SKS? I'm curious what those additional assets were. What were the new things that you implemented? I don't mean additional awareness, because surely you guys are more aware now since July 13th that somebody's trying to kill Trump. But what were the additional materials that were in place, whether it be people, technology, whichever? He did not explain that. Now, these are the assets that he says he did have that day, not knowing if these were additional or just your standard assets. But this is what he says were all present yesterday. A counter sniper team. Where was the counter sniper team? I'm just curious. I'm not saying they could have done anything, but where were they? Because had the counter sniper team been put in strategic locations, I don't know, maybe like the corners of this little small area where this funnels down, the golf course funnels down to a smaller area, maybe you put a sniper in each area. I can't imagine that you couldn't do that. My guess is the snipers were probably way over at the clubhouse. Another asset was counter surveillance agents on the exterior. No kidding. On the exterior, right? Let me guess. At the driveway. Checking IDs when people roll in. Really? Because clearly you had nobody for hundreds and hundreds of yards on the exterior of this location, because you had a guy sitting within spitting distance of the fence, of the public accessed area from the street, sitting mere feet, not yards, feet from where somebody would have been if they had actually secured that perimeter. So please don't lie to me and tell me that you had counter surveillance agents on the exterior. Just be more specific and say they're probably at the entrance, because they were not guarding the exterior. Again, if so, explain how this happened. He also stated that they had, and get this, I love this one, counter unmanned aerial assistance elements. Again, counter unmanned aerial assistance elements. Drones. I love how these people try to militarize their actions and their activities by using really formal words instead of just saying drones. Although plebes use the word drones. Come on, spare me with your counter unmanned aerial assistance elements. That, by the way, nobody saw, there's no recollection of, we've seen no video of, and certainly They didn't spot the guy in the tree line. You had somebody who visually had to be on the ground in order to see that. So your little counter unmanned aerial assistant element didn't seem to be very effective, or nobody knows how to use it, or my guess is it was not being used. It was probably on property in a box in somebody's trunk and was never airborne. So again, seemed like another episode of Groundhog Day, but I did want to point out some of the key elements that they did discuss, which were locations of everybody on the property that day. They did mention, finally, give somewhat of an accurate description of Trump being on the fairway of hole number 5. So the fairway would have been kind of in this area, and with that in mind, the shooter, a lead shooter or potential shooter, future shooter if he could have, was in the area of this 6th green, which would have been down here. So keeping those two locations in mind, clearly this row of trees, luckily at this point, is probably what saved Trump from at least being shot at in this case. And as you can see, it was not that far away, a mere 275 yards, definitely within the effective range of the SKS that this whack job had. But again, with the trees being in the way, he was not going to get a shot off. But again, being on the fairway means he was headed to the green. So at some point, he would have been on that green, which at that point, very possible he could have had a shot at Trump. But certainly once they exited the green and headed to the tee box of hole number 6, they certainly would have been in the line of sight of this particular shooter. But one thing I did notice is they talk about how the Secret Service agent that spotted this nutbag with the blue hair, that he spotted him as he was surveying the tree line near the green. So I'm only assuming at this point that maybe that guy was near the tree line whenever or near the green, I should say, when he was surveying the tree line. Again, unless he had pretty excellent eyesight, I doubt he was hundreds of yards away when he took that shot. So just assuming that the guy was more in this type of area. I'm saying all this because I'm really suspect about, you have a black muzzle in a shaded area, because this was under trees, poking out of a fence, and somebody spots it. That's a pretty keen eye, if you ask me. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying that is a very, very, very keen eye, because they did not, unless they knew something was going on that day. You hear what I'm saying? Unless they knew something was going on that day, they weren't expecting to see a muzzle poking through. And the muzzle of this gun could not have been any more than probably maybe 20 inches. So that's not a lot of the muzzle to be poking out. I doubt he poked the entire muzzle through. My guess is he probably just used it as a resting point to put the muzzle through the fence in order to get it steady. So there probably wasn't much more than a few inches of that out. Again, no idiot, even this idiot, would have likely put the entire muzzle through the fence, which would have at least given the agent more to look for. But they weren't looking for anything. They were just scanning the perimeter. So very keen eye if that's legitimately and honestly what happened that day. Now, some things that I still have a question on right now is, where was this blue-haired Democrat's car at? He had driven this Nissan, which again, very weird that he's driving a Nissan. Somebody has said it may be his daughter or his sister's vehicle. No confirmation on that, simply people commenting on that. But it had a license plate from a 2012 Ford pickup truck that was stolen, put on the Nissan. So very strange. Again, that doesn't seem normal for some guy who doesn't have a reason to be hiding before that to have stolen it. In other words, why wouldn't he just have the normal license plate on there? Had he committed another crime and he was running from somebody? At this point, I don't think he was. Yeah, maybe he planned that far ahead to where he was going to take a shot at Trump and then leave. Come on, man, that's a stretch. Very, very weird that a stolen... there's a lot of information that has to come out now, who the Nissan belonged to and who the Ford belonged to that the stolen license plate came from. But regardless, the guy had to park it somewhere, and clearly he had to park it somewhere that didn't draw a lot of attention. Now, clearly the Secret Service wasn't doing a very good job that day, so he probably could have parked it right behind him on the roadway, and it probably wouldn't have mattered. I'm being sarcastic. So clearly he didn't park it right where he was. Somebody would have seen that. If you look across the street, this is a parking lot. I think it's a post office area. Some other parking lots kind of intercede right there. My guess is word is probably going to come out that he parked in this parking lot directly across that fenced-in area where the green was and just walked right across. Somewhere in that area. To me, that would not have drawn a whole lot of suspicion other than the fact that this was a Sunday, so that car was likely sitting out there pretty much by itself. Even if it was another type of business, most of these businesses might not have been open on a Sunday. So I would guess that it may have drawn a little bit of attention with a single car sitting in a vacant parking lot, but not enough in most cases. And it may have even drawn some attention. Could have had somebody drive by there, a law enforcement guy, just kind of peer at it. But if he would have run the license plate, he would have seen that it was from a stolen 2012 Ford pickup truck. So the fact that they weren't attracted to the vehicle tells me that it was in a location that did not draw any real attention, which again, it's likely and, very well could have been believable that it was in this particular parking lot right across the street there. Now, a couple of key things that I want to point out. Again, Secret Service is claiming that this was textbook. This was a success. I'd like to remind him that it was a success in that Donald Trump was not shot. It was a complete failure that this guy even got there. In fact, you might not have even caught the guy if a civilian who was not part of your Secret Service detail had not taken a picture of him and his license plate as he left the area and gave it to y'all. Had somebody not done that, we might still be looking for the guy. That was not successful on your part. You did a horrible job. Your guy visually saw the guy enough, at least the muzzle is what you're saying, to shoot at him, but you lost him after that. You completely lost him. Had it not been for a civilian, you wouldn't have caught up with him 50 miles down the road and claimed a success with this. This was a failure. The fact that you didn't get Trump killed does not make it a success. You successfully kept him out of harm's way, but he was in harm's way prior to that. You can't react to something that you screwed up on and call it a success. It was a complete failure up to that point. You just got out of it. That doesn't make the whole operation a success. That doesn't mean you need a medal or a plaque on your wall because your guys did a wonderful job. That means it's time for you to check and adjust. That means that you allowed that threat element to get on that property. And had it not been for trees, you're sitting here bragging about how no shots were fired. Maybe God putting trees on that island is why no shots were fired. But it certainly was not because you guys did your job. It just means the guy didn't have a shot yet. He was in place. The guy had been in place for 12 hours. He was literally in place, and you did not find him until supposedly you saw something poking out. Now, the reporter said later on about him potentially, why didn't you walk the perimeter or investigate the perimeter before Trump got there? And boy, he dodged that question. He kept saying that this was an unscheduled event that Trump had done. So he was putting the blame back on Trump and off of him. He never answered the question if this place had been, if they had looked at the perimeter and examined the perimeter and searched it for any potential dangers. He never answered that. You know why? Because they didn't. Trump went to this golf course to play golf that day. There was a 12-hour window that this guy was there. Nobody ever searched this area. Their layered approach that he keeps bragging about was their plan. There was never a plan to search this place. Do you think if Barack Obama had decided to go play golf at Trump International, which yesterday I misspoke and said it was Mar-a-Lago, it's Trump International golf course 3 miles down the road. If Barack Obama just decided to go to the Trump International, do you think that they would have examined the perimeter of this location? Do you think maybe they would have walked the tree line? Do you also think that there would have been more people out there even while Barack Obama had been playing golf as opposed to Trump? Let's face it, there was nobody on the perimeter. You have this massively long fence all along this one side where this potential shooter was. And when he runs out of the bushes after being shot at by Secret Service, no one from the Secret Service saw him or saw what vehicle he got in. So that means there was nobody on the south side of this property this entire time, and likely not on the east side either, because nobody came from that direction either to see this guy jump in his car and take off. So you had two sides at least of a four-sided perimeter that was not guarded. Now, a couple of things I want to point out that I've kind of blamed, and I think some of us have blamed the media for getting wrong. But remember, the media, they're stupid to a lot of this stuff. They don't understand the tactical wording that's being used and all that. They will make up their own words, but sometimes they're going to use the words of people that they is perceived to know better, right? The acting head of the FBI for that Miami area, Palm Beach area, came out. And this guy, he's the one calling them ceramic tiles. We know they're ceramic plates that go in a plate carrier, right? That are hung on the fence. They keep calling them ceramic tiles, and we're like, oh, the media is stupid. Well, it seems like Mr. Tactical Slickback Hair here of the FBI is not very knowledgeable about these types of things either. Now, he does mention that the firearm, he does call it the right name, because the media has been calling an AK-47 style weapon. He says SKS, but watch how he says it. An SKS, like he's never uttered those words before. Like when we talk about an SKS, we just call it just like that. You know, hey, what's that gun? It's an SKS. This guy says it like it's the first time he's ever said those three words in a row, and then he talks about the ceramic tiles.
The evidence response team is collecting and processing multiple evidentiary items. These range from the rifle, which is an SKS model with a scope and obliterated serial numbers, to 2 bags, the subject's electronics, and what appears to be ceramic tiles.
So that's what we're dealing with here. Very low level lack of knowledge. The other thing the FBI has given to the media, and yesterday, in my video yesterday, I did blame the media for getting this wrong, or at least for twisting these words and making it look like the shooting was something that it was not. They call this an apparent assassination attempt. Shots don't have to be fired at Trump for it to be an assassination attempt. This guy was there attempting to kill Donald Trump. He just was not successful. So it was a true assassination attempt. When we heard somebody, and I think it was NBC yesterday, that called this an apparent assassination attempt, again, I blame the media. That came from the FBI.
The FBI immediately responded to the scene here in West Palm Beach, Florida, and we are investigating this matter as an apparent assassination attempt of former President Trump.
That's who you got running the show. That's who you got giving information to the media, and that's why they're running with poorly worded information. I'm also curious. I do lack a little bit of confidence, certainly in the Secret Service, but in the FBI as well. The FBI, remember, this guy right here with the slick back hair is likely one of the agents, but certainly one of the ones in charge of the FBI agents that raided Mar-a-Lago. Remember that? Remember whenever they went in there guns a-blazing to search Mar-a-Lago for pieces of paper? Remember they went in there with very strong force, armed with plate carriers, helmets, cams on their helmets, all that good stuff, night vision, to raid this place looking for papers. This guy was partially responsible for that. I don't think he made the decision, but he certainly was involved in it. So excuse me while I lack the confidence of the local FBI, who has already shown that they are anti-Trump and are doing the bidding of the DOJ and the Biden administration and the White House. Folks, these people hate Donald Trump. They hate him because of the words he says that hurts their feelings. They hate him because he's trying to undo policies that have gotten the United States in endless wars, bleeding money out to the rest of the world, and kickbacks. All this is a result of money. Honestly, guys, this all goes back to money. If nothing Trump were doing would take away, or if anything Trump were doing would not take away from the kickbacks.
Understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
Everybody else's share to NATO. That alone caused congressmen, senators to not get certain kickbacks, to not get certain things. Remember, it's all legal for those people to get their free stuff, right? Bob Menendez, who was running around with 14-year-olds, I think the only reason why he got in trouble is because he didn't actually go to jail for messing around with 14-year-olds, right? Other than that, none of them ever get a slap on the wrist. So these guys all get money from the federal government some other way, whether it's from NGOs, whether it's from other countries, some kind of way they're getting all this extra money. All this money that we funnel to all these other countries who hate us, that a percentage of that, a portion of that comes back to all these politicians, whether how they get wined and dined, oh, let me give you this fancy thing when you come to my country, or just payroll checks right back to them, or insider trading information. All these politicians get extra stuff. Trump was trying to, he never succeeded fully in doing that, but trying to undo all that. He was pushing a true America First agenda. The world is intent on creating a one world government, and Donald Trump is standing in the way of that. I'm not saying he's the savior. I'm not. Some of you out there are a little bit too pro-Trump, and I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but that you put him more in like a cult area, like he's the savior, like he's the chosen one. I don't believe that. I believe he is a rare find in that he is not a career politician that dropped himself into politics. He doesn't need all this extra money, therefore he's not going after it like Biden getting the $300 million from China. Trump did not assume the presidency to make additional money and to further his family's wealth. That's not why he did this. So it pisses everybody else off because he's not like them and he's not in it for the money, which means he is ending their gravy trains. That's why they hate this man. And all these people, including these clowns with the FBI and the Secret Service, they all have something to lose too. They all know where the bodies are buried. They're all getting kickbacks and little free stuff, like the ATF gets away with stealing our guns. When they confiscate guns, they steal them and they go, oh, we lost guns. Bull crap. You didn't lose guns. They know where these things are. So they cherry pick the things that they want along the way, including the FBI and Secret Service. So Trump is the one standing in the way of their gravy train. And that's why they hate him. They view him as taking food off their table. They see the things that have existed, the corruption that's existed all along as being, hey, that's the way it is. I'm not doing anything wrong. Everybody else does it this way. That's just the way it goes. They see Trump standing in the way of that, and it pisses them off because, again, they see that as a direct attack on them personally, as taking food off the table for themselves and their families. That's why I don't trust these guys. That's why I'm grateful for Ron DeSantis conducting his own investigation, and I pray to God he does not allow 1 ounce of evidence to leave the state of Florida in the hands of the Secret Service or the FBI, because we will never hear the end of this story if that is allowed to happen.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. Peace over.